it should be in the literature. So that is one of the tenets we are talking about in this particular new model. The other one is participation, where participation simply here means that when host communities are actively involved in making decisions about what the problem is and how it should be resolved, and how this translates into program planning and broadcast and stuff like that in terms of community radio. So these are two of the main tenets in the socio-cultural model for communicating health via community radio. And the third tenet is social capital, where we believe that both access and participation should strategically and intentionally lead to building both on-air and off-air social relations, because in close-knit communities, most of the interactions happen because there is cohesion, there's reciprocity, there's information sharing and stuff like that. And usually the communal ethos supersedes individual responsibility. So you can't really target individuals as we see with most dominant paradigm-inspired approaches. So it is better you come from a really top-down participatory approach, and that can be done when you see community as closely knit and that the communal holds sway over the individual. So these are the three tenets in the sociocultural model for communicating health via community radio, which myself and Prof. Eliza, we are about submitting our manuscript to IMCR as a book project. This month we are publishing for it to be published by IMCR. But for this particular work, I just look back at some of the work that I have done, both for my PhD and my postdoctoral work. And the thinking here is to see practically how do we enhance access and participation. Yes, I've spoken about it quite a bit, that it is very critical in having new lenses to understand community radio health outcomes. But practically, how do we do this? Judging by the fact that there are practical challenges to access and participation in the field. So this work looks at that. And one of the things that I came across both from my PhD work and my postdoctoral work is building syndication or synergies between community radio and existing community media in these host communities. And one of the prominent community media that we can use to build existing synergies between community radio and other media to provide to enhance access and participation to host communities is what we call community audio towers. It's affectionately called community centers in Ghana. It's very popular. It is all over. So if you can see my screen, this is an example of a CAT. That's a community audio tower. So this is also an example of it. So you can see that it is very basic. I mean, it doesn't require much to do. So this is also the community radio station that I use for my PhD, which is in the central region of Ghana. So now let me talk about why this particular work. So like I explained earlier, community radio access difficulties in Ghana, and that also translates into participation issues. So access barriers include economic challenges of batteries to power radio sets, irregular community visits by station staff because of financial difficulties, transmission challenges, and difficulties in calling into programs due to jammed telephone lines, and also the cost of making calls. So these are real practical difficulties. So how do we resolve this? And one of the things that I'm talking about is the popularity and enhanced access to community audio towers. So all over Ghana, beyond community radio, another community media that is also very popular is the CAT. So usually, like we saw in the picture I just shared, CATs are community-based channels of communication comprised of powerful fixed speakers hoisted on bamboo or steel poles and used for narrow casting. So let me go back to it. So usually you see that with these ones, all that they need is an amplifier connected to a microphone, and then these loudspeakers. So they don't need a frequency. And because it's broadcast, narrowcasted, you don't need to tune in. Everybody can hear it, and it's within a particular space, and it's controlled by local media. So that is a typical CAT for a community audio tower. So the essence of this particular work is that CR, that's community radio syndication, via CATs can potentially address access and participation barriers to communicatively marginalized communities in Ghana. So alternative media like CR complement other local forms of media in providing ordinary people with enhanced access, unlike mainstream channels. And people like Clemencia Rodriguez have written extensively about finding synergies between community media locally and then not seeing them as silos that exist, but rather building synergies between these different community media to enhance access and participation to ordinary people. So with this particular work, my main question is that in what ways can CAT narrowcasting enhance host community members' access and participation in CR activities in Ghana? So I just picked a few insights from my previous work, for my PhD work, and also for my postdoc work. So with my postdoc work, I collected data just at the tail end of last year, and one of the things that I just put here from an FGD section says that so they were talking about how to enhance the access and participation into the health programming of the local community radio station called FAWE, which is in the eastern region of Ghana. And one of the FGD participants had this to say. He said that since we have information centers, that is CATs, around, we can announce that at this time, there is a program ongoing at FAWE FM concerning our community. So everybody tunes into FAWE FM so people will listen. I think through that, we, FAWE FM, will improve upon our engagement with them. And it's interesting to see that an FGD participant who was a community member refers to FAWE FM as we. So conceptually, they own the station, but they tune in, but they also believe that due to the access and participation challenges I talked about earlier, when synergies and syndication is built with these existing community media like CATs, it will enhance people's access to the health programming of the station. So this is from 2024 from my postdoc data collection. From my PhD data collection in 2021, which was also based on a different community radio station in Ghana, that is Radio Peace, which I showed a picture of a while ago in the central region of Ghana. So when we were talking about the difficulties in access and participation by host community members, an FGD participant said this. Though Radio Peace has contributed a lot towards the fight against COVID-19. Of course, I collected data at the height of COVID-19, so that is that was the ongoing issue. So let me just take this again. So though Radio Peace has contributed a lot towards the fight against COVID-19, I believe that they can improve by syndicating with all the information centers, that CATs, in the rural communities within their catchment areas to relay their COVID-19 and other important programs. So from two different studies at different times, it really comes true that syndicating community radio work with CATs has the potential to really enhance access and participation to ordinary people. But it is not all rosy. Practically, I had discussions with some of the community radio staff, and these are some of the barriers why, yes, the potential for community radio and CATs to be syndicated to improve access, but there are practical barriers to this manifestation. The first one is service fees by CATs. When I engaged the station manager of Radio Peace, who is also a former vice chair of AMAC Africa. One of the things he said that in the past, when he has tried to engage these CATs to syndicate the radio stations, the community radio stations programs, the CATs wanted a fee because they also need to sustain their activities. If for nothing at all, they will pay for electricity and stuff like that, which of course, if you know community radio work, already they themselves are struggling financially, so they would not want to carry on another financial burden. So that is one of the issues, the fact that the CATs feel that when they syndicate community radio programming and narrowcast it to people within their community, then the onus lies on the community radio stations to pay them, which it becomes an issue. Another thing is that participation remains partnerships between CATs and community radio stations remain unexplored and untested in Ghana. So there's no template for syndication for CR. So you see that these different community media, whether it's community radio or CAT, they are just doing their own thing, and there's no real template for anybody to follow. So though when I spoke with a station manager at Power FM through my postdoc work, when I also spoke with the station manager at Radio Peace through my PhD work, they have this zeal and desire to engage CATs to enhance access and participation to people, but there's no template. So people are wondering, people are just trying to do their own thing because they haven't seen one that works yet. So that is one of the barriers to why CATs and community radio, though they have the potential to sort of build synergies among each other, has not really been explored in Ghana. So these are the lessons that I think can be drawn from this, and this can be explored further going forward. So the first thing is that CR, that's community radio, is complementary to other alternative media forms, and that's is very clear, and that needs to be explored. Another thing is that synergies can be built between CR and other local alternative channels, that is syndication. Why is this so important? Because local and organic solutions for addressing CR access and participation barriers, we all agree throughout the literature, there are serious CR access and participation barriers, which I discussed earlier. But syndication with other alternative media offers organic solutions because already the host community members listen and participate in the CR activities. They also do same for the CAT. So it is not something that requires them to change their everyday media habits. It's something that they already do. So it's just for it to be worked on strategically and intentionally. The other lesson is that mediated communication by CR engages with other culturally relevant platforms such as interpersonal communication, community audio towers, and creative messaging. So when you read the literature, it is very clear that with CR, it can't, because CR is a borderline medium that straddles both online and off-air, it naturally sort of engages with other media, other alternative media within its host communities, interpersonal communication, community audio towers, and stuff like that. So this offers huge potential for community radio to improve access and participation barriers, which has always been the bane of community radio work. So I conclude by saying that syndication of CR broadcasting by CATs can remove the barriers of radio sets and the economic expense of batteries to power such receivers. So in conclusion, I say that the marriage between CATs and CR must be explored as an extension of the latest broadcasting in Ghana. CR broadcasting and CATs narrowcasting syndication can contribute to enhancing access and participation of host community members in CR's activities. Thank you very much, Madam Wase, in my local language.
Thanks, Emmanuel. It's always fascinating to hear radio scholars as well, because I forget about the complexities of radio and the technology behind it. And I think Vinod's work highlights that for me as well. And I'm excited that we've got the UNESCO chair of community radio amongst us today too. But thank you so much. And I am sure that there'll be lots of questions for you. But I did mean to say earlier, we'll save questions till the end if that's okay with everyone. So if you have questions for Emmanuel and subsequent speakers, please write them down. Don't forget them, and we will discuss them at the end. Okay. So thanks, Emmanuel. That was terrific. So next is Associate Professor Lauren Dyll. Now, Lauren's going to talk about marking memories past and present, engraved heritage recording through participatory action research in South Africa. Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, thank you, Monique, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me? All good?
Yes, very
okay,
good. Yeah,
perfect.
thank you.
Now I've got to just remember how to move slides. Hold on a seckie. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. Okay, so thank you for already reading my title. This is it's sort of an output from a project or two different projects that I'm doing collaboratively with a bunch of different people across South Africa. But the authors that you see on this title slide here are people that I'm working with in terms of an actual paper, and we actually decided to turn it into a paper for a book, which I'll get to later. So just to acknowledge my co-authors and team members in this slide as well. So the presentation will explain the participatory action research approach that was mobilized and adapted in 2 heritage recording projects in South Africa. The fieldwork was conducted by a diverse research team comprising local and Indigenous peoples, teachers, artists, archaeologists, architects, cultural landscapers, heritage practitioners, and communication researchers. The project's purpose was to record and interpret archaeologically significant rock engravings, integrating Western epistemologies and Indigenous knowledge. The participants' dialogic engagement with the selected historical material culture produced an oral reception study, or a living heritage, of how engravings resonate with current experiences and values. The co-constructed outputs from these projects will also be shared with you in this presentation. So just a little bit about kind of the theoretical framing here. Empathy as an expression of political solidarity is a central concept in social change practice and theory from a participatory perspective. Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy, which restores to people the right to produce knowledge based on their lived experience, values, and local knowledge, is foundational in this perspective. Freire remains influential in grassroots and activist initiatives, although he was obviously first writing in the 70s. Suzina and Tuft in 2022 produced a book and collated wonderful articles that share ways in which Freire's 5 human-centered ontological principles, being dialogue, love, empathy, hope, and humility, are mobilized for pro-social transformation. So Linje Manyoza's explanation that empathy allows us to enter worlds with which we are not familiar dovetails with the Mashishing Project's objective and methodology. Empathy in this way facilitates the diverse interpretations and respect thereof through oral interpretations with the visual as a catalyst for dialogue and empathetic engagement in knowledge production. The Mashishing Project then aims to encourage broader heritage literacy to close the gap between singular, often Western interpretations of the past, and to rather create a participatory heritage, living heritage bricolage of contemporary voices. So the 2 projects were partially funded by the National Heritage Council of South Africa, and this presentation primarily shares the adapted COVID-19 responsive methodology to account for the Mashishing Project's co-constructed design. A South African research team, diverse in language, culture, age, geographic location, and forms of knowledge, participated in the interpretation of rock engravings situated in Mashishing, which is in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, which you can see sort of to the east of this map here. The project is based at CCMS at UKZN, but as you can see from this list, contributors range from a variety of communities and institutions throughout South Africa, and the project was enabled through the agency of the Lydenburg Museum, with very big thanks to JP Saliers, who is a very permanent part and team member of this project. So this presentation hones in on 2 specific sites and groups of participants from different geographical areas. Firstly, a diverse group from Mashishing, where the engravings are located, and Vitrai in the southern Kalahari, where Indigenous Kumani San participants engaged via a Zoom reception study. So to quote rock engraving specialist David Morris, who was also part of this team, archaeologist, material culture is a physical residue of past intangible heritage. So sharing insights builds intangible heritage, something that the group of researchers mobilized in a previous project at Vichypoort. based on rock engravings occurring at the southern edge of the Kalahari. The Bishiput approach was novel in that it had not been applied to rock engraving sites where a plurality of voices enabled the past and present heritage layers of a site to be recorded. This project, our first project at Bishiput in the Kalahari, resulted in a book called Engraved Landscape, Bishiput Many Voices, and you can see on the slide here is a page from that book. At Kumani, Healer and Crafter, Issa Kraper's request for the project to grow, and I quote there, and given his San identity and being skilled crafters, some Kumani community members also then participated in the second project, the second Mashashing project. Neither of the projects were restricted to just the pre-colonial images on rock in the southern Kalahari and in the Mashashing vicinity. In both cases, the ranges of material extended to other traces. So, for example, you can see here in the picture at Bishiput, there was discussion around grindstones, a belt clasp, nails, a cartridge case. In Mashashing, the selected rock engravings form part of a larger cultural landscape. Boonplatz is in a rural veld setting, Coromandel as chief residence is in a landscape farm, and the others in either urban or peri-urban landscapes. Many stories emerge through engaging these disparate items and spaces, some members of the team seeking to synthesize their presence into a single narrative, while others understood them as fragments of multiple pasts gathered near and amongst the engravings. In Mashashing, the range of inscriptions on stone around which discussion revolved included a variety of archaeological and historical engravings. So the selection was determined by, firstly, availability in the public domain, secondly, accessibility to be physically engaged, and thirdly, to be a representation of a form of cultural, social, spiritual, or communication function. And you can see a couple of these selected inscriptions on the slide, and there were more of them, and I hope you can see some of that on the timeline, because as I said, it was seminal to the project that these inscriptions ranged across time and culture. But some of them were stone engravings or petroglyphs at the Boonplatz farm site, the Lydenburg heads that are in the museum from the early Iron Age, African early Iron Age. They were believed to be part of initiation rites. Inscriptions on the magazine tower that had engraved names of the British 94th Regiment soldiers, monuments at Lydenburg Museum, and ancestral graves from the mid-20th century relating more to Christian faith and local communities of this time. So in terms of the fieldwork, it was originally planned to visit all of our initially selected sites, but due to COVID, the methodology became a hybrid of both fieldwork and online reception and feedback. Though the project centered on engravings as a form of material culture, the primary objective was to build, as Reason and Bradbury call in their PAR work, they call a participative community of inquiry, to record dialogue on what was visually engaged in the field or using photographic reception packs. Understanding the adaptability that is required in participatory fieldwork, the project avoids a constricting definition of participatory action research, but rather is premised on the idea of developing a decolonial epistemological conviviality, which really means bringing diverse voices together and historical transdisciplinary expertise to think through the right of different people to talk with each other. So important to our understanding of participatory action research is that it had to result in knowledge that could be translated into workable or useful outputs. So the COVID-19 responsive methodology meant only 3 of the originally selected sites were physically visited, and they included the late Iron Age rock engraving site, the powder magazine, and memorials at the Lydenburg Museum. So we could still maintain that idea of a timeline across, a timeline and cultural differences. The Boonplatz rock engraving site depicts Oconee settlement patterns, including circles, which represent central stone-walled cattle enclosures, as well as animals and zoomorphic figures. Having occupied the area between the 1500s and 1820s, the Oconee people are some of the earliest people to settle in this area. So in terms of our project, the first physical reception session included local primary school teachers and members of the Boonplatz community. And the second session included Lydenburg Museum staff and representatives of the Environmental Education Centre. Participants were guided and questioned with a formal questionnaire developed by the research team. And there was skills transference of archaeological recording in the physical tracing of by community participants at the Powder magazine. And you can see that in the middle picture over there. Field sessions were recorded digitally to share with the larger research team, and then obviously simultaneously recorded our data. And the Boomplatz community revealed new interpretations of the engravings, other than those that are historically documented in books, with a general response being that they are largely symbolic in nature and intent, and possibly linked to initiation rites. The digital virtual aspect became a significant part of the project to continue with the inclusion of initial team members, especially those that were remote, but all of us, right, in South Africa because it was COVID. And it also allowed further diversity by welcoming more participants from other areas we didn't initially think to include due to a budget. And we wanted to obviously visit the site, but now we were going online. These included a youth group from Cape Town and a group of Khoisan speaking descendants in the Karoo. And this was a valuable outcome by including more people. To use technology in our favor, we, let me just go back up. To use technology in our favor, we needed to factor in a new element to the methodology, namely the provision of digital communication resources and skills to the remote dwelling Kamani San participants. In the Kalahari, we used an iPad, internet, and photo-based reception packs. Thank you very much to Julie Grant for making that journey and facilitating those skills training sessions. And the need for an adapted methodology therefore catalyzed further benefits that moved beyond the initial scope of the project, providing skills as well as equipment that is now owned by the Kamani. The workshops took place in the Crepa home. This is Isak and Lisa's home here, and they worked through the photo-based reception packs while connected to the broader team members throughout South Africa, and it was held in both English and Afrikaans. Through the participants' engagement with the material culture, an empathetic response was elicited as to how artifacts might resonate with our own experiences and values across cultural and temporal divides. And an example of this is here in Isak Crepa's response to the image of a geometric engraving, and this was shared with us in a feedback session, and he also touches on that zoomorphic looking figure here at the bottom. I'll let you read this for a sec on your own. Okay. Can I move on? Oops. I will now. Okay. The project not only engaged relevant Indigenous communities within the interpretation process, but also in its project outputs. The project has generated an educational manual for grade 4 to 6 learners to address the exclusion of Mashishing heritage within the school curriculum. It appeals to more than the written, literary, and mathematical intelligences by providing exercises that engage learners' other strengths, such as spatial, narrative, and visual intelligences. It was workshopped with the local Mashishing teachers in 2019, and we presented it to the Department of Education in 2022. And here's just a few. This is what the cover of the booklet looks like. Beautifully illustrated by local artist Marina. It obviously factors a lot of storytelling into the exercises that have been devised for the grade 4 to 6 teachers to do with the students. Okay, so discussions with the Lydenburg Museum curator and staff, as well as a tour of the museum, identified the important role that a new tourist brochure and documentary could play in the dissemination of the project's research, especially if these outputs engaged a diverse team. And so the tourist brochure, all three of these outputs have been done, but unfortunately we've run into some trouble where our funder did not honor the entire budget. So we are still looking for other funding opportunities to print. We have given it to the schools electronically, but we want to try and provide it in a printed form. So any ideas are welcome there. The book is being written and it's being published by UNISA Press. Collaborative chapters are being written by the diverse team members who are passionate about a particular aspect. So, for example, just quickly, a chapter is called "We Consider What Remains, What Continues, and What Disintegrates." The chapter concentrates on how Indigenous orality adds to the Indigenous knowledge on rock engraving and the role original rock engravers may have played in the melting pot of African cultures. There is another chapter by two archaeologists, as well as some of the Khoisan Indigenous people who are going to be writing together. The chapter seeks to evaluate the challenges and outcomes of the project and includes the shaping of a vision for the future, particularly the nurturing of tourism potential at the site. Qiniso Mbili, his chapter is entitled Shifting Perceptions, is based on his completed master's thesis, which focused on the challenges and benefits of documenting Bokoni tangible heritage and intangible heritage through photo voice. And Mbili reflects on his visit to the sites from an autoethnographic perspective as a young Zulu man. So to conclude, participatory heritage projects that create public spaces enable all participant voices to be present and recognized in their multiplicity and complexity. Generally, archaeology brings methods and techniques of analysis in the interpretation of what remains, providing a particular kind of explanation. The Bishoput and Mashashing projects have illustrated, though, that there are other ways of knowing, particularly when wider conversations and broader constituencies are encouraged. The expert narratives get to be decentered, not diminished, as they remain important, but not as the only voice. The inadvertent opportunity to connect further diversity through improved digital communication demonstrates that adaptability is key. This sort of hybrid model may benefit other heritage participatory projects and even perhaps on a global project. Yet we should not lose sight of the importance of being in and walking through a landscape that enables a depth of sense making and reading that we were able to gather in the Bishoput project. Engagement with artifacts of the built environment and cultural landscapes leads to the considerations of absent peoples represented by and present in their artifactual residue. And as explained by Roger Fisher, who's a team member on this project, this is an embodiment of the hands that made. While these people remain nameless and faceless, through empathetic engagement, we can conjure up memories of and appreciation of these peoples. We surmise that rock engravings mark their present as part of an established traditional culture, perhaps to create something durable that will communicate with the future. The reception studies test this presumption while exploring what meanings might yet manifest in contemporary, culturally distanced or disrupt traditions of the makers of these memories. The intention or meanings with which these images are initially made are likely to change over time. This does not devalue their meaning, but rather allows a rediscovery of what is meaningful for people today, once more reiterating the fluidity of cultural identity and values. And thank you for listening.
Got lots of applause for you there, Lauren. Thank you so much for that. What a huge project, what a culturally rich, fascinating project. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about the co-design collaborative elements to that, but really interesting work, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So next we have Associate Professor Eliza Govender and Dr. Mpumi Gumede, who are going to present on exploring art-based methods for health and well-being through research and community practice.
Thank you, Monique. Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to join you today from Durban, South Africa, and to share some of our research and work that we've been doing over the last 5 to 7 years. What I will share with you today is a collection of a range of participatory action research projects that we've undertaken over the last 5 to 7 years. I will address some of the conceptual thinking and considerations on art-based research, and Mpumi Gumede will take you through some of the examples. So as we think about participatory action research and as we think about art-based methods, there's a few points of departure that I would like to highlight. So when we think about participation of women in health research, it's important to recognize that their inclusion is not something new, it's constantly evolving. However, the challenge of participation and inclusion of women often emerges when policies and programs are in support of these processes, but they are not enabling in terms of effective outcomes. And so as collective scholars within CCMS, we have looked at art-based research from 3 points of departure, which we see across extensive literature in the field. The first is looking at the platform, and is the platform enabling or disabling towards addressing sensitive and often taboo topics in healthcare research. So when we look at art-based research, we try to look at it as an enabling process to create spaces for conversation and dialogue. So often health decisions and choices around health products in Africa are often embroiled with biological and social behavioral influences, particularly in the context of topics like HIV and prevention research and associated stigmas. We often see difficulties around women engaging in co-creation, and participation in research through art really allows us to shift research from research on women to research with participants through a reiterative process. So art-based research for us often should be an enabling platform. And as scholars, we have to often engage with aspects where it can be disenabling, but art-based research should ultimately allow us to have a platform to engage with women on sensitive and taboo topics in healthcare research. Also from an art-based research perspective, positionality of the researcher is incredibly important. And I put in the words the intentional engagement because it really places a strong onus on the researcher to look at tailoring research projects, which requires in-depth insight into the participants and to purposefully reconstitute the position of the researcher. And that's really navigating through the paradigms of shifting from an authoritative professional figure to a co-producer of knowledge. And we often see those tensions arriving between patient and provider interaction and engagement in healthcare settings, and art-based research being an opportunity to reconstitute that authoritative figure into a co-producer of knowledge. We also look at a point of departure for art-based research on the process, understanding that art-based research can often be complex, messy, it often needs to be negotiated, but I quite like this quote from James Berg, which really advocates for a radical approach that crosses boundaries of art and research. And so we often find that with art-based research, there's a crossing of these boundaries, but there's a trickiness to it, there's an intuitive level. There's often a disharmony with the standardized models of engaging on topics of healthcare. But it allows us through this radical approach to often tread in areas where very Western-centric models are unable to delve into. So with that few points of departure on platform, process, and position, I'd like to take us back to some of the historic interventions we've had in South Africa on body mapping in 2002. This for us is really a very iconic and historical intervention using participatory methods in South Africa through the Long Life Project, a group of Bambanani women who were struggling to disclose their HIV status. And it was a project leading on from extensive memory work happening in the country, but really trying to shift the discourse from preparation for death to celebration of life. And what does it mean to live a long life positively? And so these are some of the early interventions we've seen in South Africa over 20 years ago, where art-based methods were really used to translate or transfer knowledge, information from an embodied self to an embodied societal narrative. So we see a lot of the methodological and epistemological developments happening here through art-based research, where art-based research starts to position the relationship between researchers and communities as collaborators and co-producers of knowledge. We also see dialogue, engagement, and collective voices, which starts to mobilize health agendas beyond an individual level, but really trying to bring co-knowledge production processes to a societal narrative. So there's a strong shift here from individual experiences into a societal engagement. We also see art-based use here being able to be translated from an individual focus to an advocacy perspective, because these art-based initiatives were instrumental in advocating for access to antiretroviral treatment during a time of AIDS denialism. We see the promotion of socialization and reducing of isolation. Women were often faced with a lot of stigma at the time, but we see a shared collective narrative emerging through art-based research. We also see emancipatory research through a collective societal dialogue. And what is particularly important for us, using body mapping here as an example of art-based research, is its ability to triangulate conversations between the self, the group, the researcher, and even a wider society. So I'm going to hand over to Kumi now, who's going to take you through some examples of how we've used art-based research stemming from these foundational interventions in body mapping to apply it specifically to journey mapping in different projects that we've worked on. Okay, over to you, Kumi.
Thanks, Prof. Eliza. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. So I will share our experiences of using art-based methods in both research and in program implementation over the past 9 to 10 years or so. So the first example will be from research. And what you see in front of you is a paper that we published where we present 2 studies that used participatory art-based methods to explore experiences and practices in sexual and reproductive health. In this case study, we adopted journey mapping as an art-based method to understand the specific vaginal practices and associated barriers and benefits of vaginal products used by women. And we worked with women from 3 diverse localities, rural, urban, and peri-urban settings in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. The journey maps for us provided insights into women's vaginal product use, including product types used, application methods used, and reasons for using vaginal health products. And this for us revealed cultural nuances in sexual and reproductive health perceptions and practices by women that would have been challenging to solicit via conventional research methods. So what you see on the screen is women documenting their general product use throughout the day, as well as their vaginal product use. In this study, journey mapping was used to understand women's clinic experiences while accessing oral PrEP. So the study initially set out to map the current and ideal clinic experiences of young women accessing healthcare facilities, with a specific emphasis on the socio-cultural challenges or opportunities that influence acceptance, uptake, and adherence of oral PrEP among young women in KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa. The purpose of using the journey mapping activity was to delve deeper into the underlying socio-cultural and contextual factors affecting oral PrEP use. And so for us, the findings extended beyond the mapping of clinic experiences and provided really in-depth insights into the broader influences on oral PrEP uptake and adherence amongst this group of women in KwaZulu-Natal. So that's just the bit that we are sharing based on our experiences conducting research. Of course, there is more, but this is what we're sharing for this presentation today. Now I'm going to move on to sharing my experiences with using art-based methods in program implementation. So the Dreams Tina Abantu Abasha, which is a Zulu term meaning we the young people, was an HIV prevention program supported by Johnson & Johnson Global Public Health Division and UNFPA South Africa. What I will be presenting to you is the formative research to understand adolescent girls and young women's lived experiences. This was conducted in 10 East and Southern African countries, and the aim was to decrease the rate of HIV infections amongst this cohort of girls and young women. And the resultant program was piloted in South Africa and later scaled to several East and Southern African countries. So in working with girls in the 10 African countries, we adopted a socio-ecological approach to understanding the girls' lived experiences and used journey mapping for the girls to map out their individual life journeys from birth to the present, highlighting significant moments, difficult times, and positive highlights in their life journeys. In addition to the life journeys, the girls also mapped out their day journeys, again highlighting barriers and favorite moments in their day, while also providing reasons why. And this enabled us to get a clearer picture of what the girls' lived experiences were in their own terms. And then we moved to a community mapping exercise where we wanted to understand the broader societal dynamics that impacted on their lived experiences. So in this exercise, the girls mapped out recreational spaces, spaces where they liked to spend their time, people recognized by the girls as influential in their communities, as well as high-risk locations and other threats that they perceived to exist in their communities, and finally to understand support services in their communities from their own perspective. And then we also did a body mapping exercise, which provided an opportunity for the girls to look forward into an ideal life experience. In this activity, they mapped out their thoughts, their feelings, their activities, places and people that they foresaw in their ideal journey, and they also identified barriers, perceived barriers to their ideal journey, as well as perceived enablers in this journey. And we hoped that this would provide insights into what a possible intervention targeting the girls for HIV prevention could look like. So what you see on the screen and the one before it are just prompts that we would then use whilst working with the girls in both community mapping and the body mapping exercise. So for the Dreams Thina Abantu Abasha program, it culminated, in fact, the results of the formative research were analyzed together with the girls. So it was a co-analysis process, and then the girls determined what a program targeting them should look like. And what's the picture that you see on the screen is a poster that they developed when they were ready to launch the program. So in conclusion, for health research, we've found that art-based methods are able to help us elicit richer data that is not readily expressed through conventional data collection tools. And it also allows for better sharing of complex and difficult experiences, for example, exploring vaginal product use. In program implementation, art-based research has the potential to inform wider societal narratives and national communication efforts like the Dreams initiative, for example. It also opened up avenues for the co-creation of youth-led HIV prevention program with adolescent girls and young women, and facilitated more meaningful engagement of young people in health programming. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Over to you, Monique.
Thank
your
you, Pume. Thank you, Eliza. Lots of applause for you there. Amazing, incredible, extraordinary data that you've gathered there. So I'm sure people will want to hear a lot more about that body mapping, journey mapping, community mapping, and sort of grasping that real embodied experience for these women. Just congratulations on your research.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you're welcome. So, and thank you, Eliza. I can see you. You're a bit smaller on my screen now, but you're at the top. So next in line is a very good, fabulous, close colleague of mine, Professor Susan Ford, and colleagues, I should say, and Associate Professor Debbie Bargali, both of whom are going to present on their research, looking at Indigenous research methods in communications and media research. And this is a case study of the National Review of Indigenous Media and Broadcasting. Take it away, Debbie and Susan.
Great. Thanks, Monique. And I just want to thank Monique and Eliza, I think, who are the main contacts who've come together to help organise this webinar. So thanks very much, Eliza and Monique, for the idea to put together this group of researchers from both KwaZulu and from Griffith University. Deb and I are really happy to be here presenting this work. Give me one moment and I will share my screen. So this paper that we are going to be presenting today is called Indigenous Research Methods in Communications and Media Research, a case study of the National Review of Indigenous Media and Broadcasting in Australia. Deb Bargali and I are presenting tonight, but we were part of a team that worked on this project. So I'll just start by acknowledging the other members of our team who were Heather Anderson, Harry Van Essem, Troy Meston, and Suze de Groot-Hoopner, who worked on this project as well. I was the project lead overall, but Deb Bargali led our Indigenous research methods component of this work, which was obviously central to the study. So I'm going to start and then Deb's going to kind of get into the core description of the methods that were used and the rationale that sits behind those methods. So this research has resulted in this report that was produced for the National Indigenous Australians Agency and for the Indigenous broadcasting sector in Australia. We called the report Radio, Television and Digital Media in 21st Century Indigenous Broadcasting, a place of old and new ways, because what we found was that this was a sector that was very much still working in traditional radio methods, the sorts of things that Emmanuel talked about at the start of this session, traditional terrestrial community radio, while other aspects of the sector were really moving forward with a lot of digital media and social media interaction and live streaming and so on. This was research that was conducted by an independent team of researchers from Griffith University, a combined team of Indigenous researchers and media researchers, specifically community media researchers. We reviewed and synthesised all the past research in this field, and there had been quite a lot done in Australia about Indigenous broadcasting, and specifically about the Indigenous broadcasting program that we were looking at. We had a mixed methods approach. So there was a survey that was done of Indigenous people's media habits and media use patterns in urban, regional and remote areas. And we had 762 responses to that initial quantitative survey, which was a fantastic response for us to receive, and we had a pretty good spread of responses to that across all areas, and this gave us really important foundational sort of fundamental information about what Indigenous people, what their media habits were in 2023. We also conducted qualitative yarning sessions and workshops in 18 remote, regional and urban areas. These were all sessions that were carried out by our team of researchers, plus an identified local community Indigenous research assistant at selected sites, particularly in our remote sites, having an Indigenous researcher paid and on board to work with the team was essential. And we also did that in some regional areas as well. And that is central to our method, and certainly central to the idea of making sure that communities benefit. One of the ways that communities benefit from the work that's being done. Okay, all right, good. So that's the second slide that I've just spoken to. Thank you. And this is just a map of all of the areas that we went to as part of this research. You can see, you know, that's obviously a map of Australia, including Tasmania there, and our team travelled to a range of metropolitan cities, all of the major metropolitan cities around Australia, across to Western Australia, as well as then covering regional areas and very remote areas. So you can see some blue pins all the way to the top of the tip of Cape York and into the Torres Strait Islands, into some very remote areas of the Northern Territory, which are those two pins just to the left in the middle at the top, into Arnhem Land and places like Ramaginning and Darwin as well. So it was an extensive project with a huge amount of field work in a short space of time, but making sure that we got to everyone and heard from as many people as possible. I'm going to throw to Deb now for the next slide and for the next few slides to talk about our methods and our methodology.
Thanks, Susan. So as Susan mentioned, this is an Indigenous research project, and we specifically operationalised an Indigenous research methodology. The Indigenous research methodology we used is by Lester Irabina-Rigney. So you can see on the screen there a comment by him, but just briefly, Indigenous research is not simply research about Indigenous peoples. It is research by, with and for Indigenous peoples. It's aligned with Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination, and it refuses to separate scholarship from activism. So Indigenous research is research by Indigenous Australians whose primary informants are Indigenous Australian peoples. But this doesn't suggest that Indigenous researchers can't do Indigenous research, just that it must be Indigenous-led. And Rigney argues also that it's politically more appropriate that Indigenous Australians actually speak through Indigenous researchers. So Indigenous research methodology is what framed the way that we delivered this whole research project across Australia. So Indigenous research principles, there's three core integrated principles, which is on the screen there, that that holds Rigney's framework, research framework. So for Rigney, Indigenous research is never neutral or dispassionate. It's grounded in the historical and ongoing struggles of Indigenous peoples against colonisation, dispossession, racism, and epistemic violence. So the very act of researching from an Indigenous standpoint is understood as a form of political resistance. And this resistance is not only political, it is also epistemological and methodological. Research must contribute to the liberation of Indigenous peoples by resisting not only the physical and political forces of colonisation, but also the dominance of Western knowledge systems. Rigney argues that Indigenous research must work to validate and strengthen Indigenous knowledges, laws, languages and worldviews. And at the methodological level, Rigney's work challenges the legacy of Western research traditions that have long objectified and exploited Indigenous peoples. Instead, he proposes a research foundation built on respect, relationality, accountability, and a collective empowerment. But one of Rigney's key principles is political integrity. This means that research must be politically accountable to Indigenous communities, not to external institutions, disciplinary norms, or colonial agendas. It's not enough to meet institutional ethical requirements. Indigenous research must stand with and for Indigenous sovereignty. But political integrity also demands more than the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives. Research must be led by Indigenous peoples, shaped by their priorities and grounded in their ways of knowing and being. Rigney also warns that the co-optation of Indigenous knowledges and the tokenistic involvement of Indigenous people in research that ultimately serves settler colonial interests, political integrity then ensures that Indigenous research maintains fidelity to Indigenous epistemological and political foundations, and that it actively resists reinforcing the very power structures that it seeks to dismantle. Susan? So we had, as Susan mentioned, a mixed research team. Half of us were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, or mostly Aboriginal peoples, and the other half were non-Indigenous peoples whose expertise lay in Indigenous community radio. And we travelled together in most places, but primarily the way we undertook our field work is that it was primarily Indigenous-led, and that ensured appropriate methodology. We also made sure that at every location that we went to for fieldwork that we actually employed Indigenous community research assistants, and they worked with us, before we got there and whilst we were there, and sometimes after we left, in terms of contracting participant recruitment, so looking for participants to actually speak to and and facilitate some of the research fieldwork on the sites that we were visiting. Do you want to go over, Susan? Next slide. Yeah. So in order for us to do this research, we undertook the research method of yarning. So yarning is an Indigenous Australian cultural practice of conversation that's grounded in respect, relationality, and deep listening. It's a way of sharing stories and knowledge that builds trust and connection. So Aboriginal academic Dawn Bessarab and African Australian Bridget Gandu theorised yarning as an Indigenous research method in their 2010 publication titled Yarning About Yarning, which identified several types of yarns. We engage a particular type of yarning identified as research yarning, which is a purposeful, topic-driven conversation that maintains cultural integrity. So research yarning has a clear beginning and a clear end. So it follows Indigenous protocols and respects participants as knowledge holders. While guided by a research agenda, it remains flexible and relational, allowing participants to share experiences in their own way. So yarning was conducted one-on-one, so face-to-face with individual peoples, as well as in what we call group yarning, where a group of people got together and we had conversations, so as a group. Also, just as that slide just shows there, and we just touched on that, so yarning's clearly underpinned by what we call Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous ways of being, and Indigenous ways of doing. And that's, been theorised by Aileen Morton Robinson, a quantum Moogle scholar, and also a scholar by the name of Karen Martin. So epistemology, ontology, and axiology, Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. So in terms of relationality, Susan? Oh, well, before we move on, actually, we can go back to that picture there. We just put these pictures in here just to show you what it looked like out there in the field for us. In quite a lot of places was actually quite remote. Others were in the city. And as I said, they were a variety of different types of radio stations that we visited. And, we spoke in groups, as one of those pictures shows. And we also, spoke with individual peoples, and people were just more than excited, as you can see in some of those pictures there, to show us the rooms that they broadcast from. Susan? Okay, so in terms of relationality and relational responsibilities, this is what grounds Indigenous research. So actually, so we've gone back to a different slide than what I thought we had before. We've changed over slides, shows, but in terms of the first comment there, as you can see, this is by Indigenous Australia Quandamooka scholar Aileen Morton Robinson. She reminds us that for Indigenous peoples, knowledge is rooted in relationality, and that's in our connections to land, to kin, and to community. And this isn't just about identity, it's about our being. So relationality shapes how we come to know, what we can know, and how we do our research. It's a sovereign foundation of Indigenous scholarship, and it makes truly grounded, innovative research possible. And the comment below is by Canadian Indigenous scholar Margaret Kovach. She emphasises here that relational responsibility is central to Indigenous research. It's not just about building relationships, it's about being accountable within them, being accountable back to community. She outlines multiple layers of responsibility. As you can see, it states between the research and the community, the researcher and the community, Indigenous academics and their communities, and even between non-Indigenous researchers and Indigenous knowledges. These relationships aren't symbolic, they come with specific responsibilities that involve both knowing and doing. That means research must be useful, respectful, and reciprocal. It should genuinely serve Indigenous communities, not just extract knowledge from them. And I'll hand back to you to close out, Susan.
So just in terms of disseminating the research, because this formed an important part of the way that we did the work and the way that we thought about the work. So there was a major industry report to the funding body that was a requirement of the work that we did for the National Indigenous Australians Agency. And we wrote that report with knowledge of and reference to the goals of First Nations Media Australia peak body. These were things that we discussed as a team, that the work that we were doing was always in support of Indigenous broadcasting in Australia and in support of the future and the strong future of Indigenous broadcasting and media. So the write-up of the research results necessarily had Rigney's principles of Indigenous research that Deb has spoken about and outlined for you, the advancement of Indigenous peoples and support for the struggle as foundational concerns. One of the important sort of presentations that we did when we finished the research was to disseminate it to an industry huddle of First Nations broadcasters. We were really fortunate that First Nations Media Australia, they run these industry huddles once every couple of months just for Indigenous broadcasters only, but they invited our team to deliver this report to that quite closed huddle because the research was important to the broadcasters and to their claims around their obtaining new license agreements and so on, but also because so many of the broadcasters had contributed to the research and therefore wanted to see the results of this favour really that they'd done for us in having us in their stations and hosting us. There was a commitment within the work and in the dissemination to provide selected elements of the research evidence that might assist individual media organisations and the First Nations Media Australia with its strategic goals as well. And that was communicated to the sector and has been communicated to them a number of times. This national work that we did led to international work with UNESCO, where UNESCO has now done a major, the first ever global survey of Indigenous media and of Indigenous peoples and media. And our team was able to do the initial work around that international global study, which was a literature review of 400 bibliographic sources on Indigenous media, but also most importantly, designing that survey and the schedule of qualitative interviews that UNESCO's carried out. So it was a really important way to internationalise the research, but also highlight the excellence, I guess, of Indigenous broadcasting in Australia as well through international work. Next slide, Mon. Final slide. Australian Indigenous media policy is internationally leading, although our friends in Canada and New Zealand do have more advanced and better funded Indigenous media sectors, but certainly the Australian sector is quite leading in terms of the policy around support and in the practice of the content producers. It's therefore an important step to disseminate this research internationally, because there's many countries around the world that have Indigenous peoples, of course, and that have Indigenous media, but don't have the right policy settings or funding or support for these media organisations and media sectors to really grow and thrive. So this brings the unique work of Australian Indigenous media to Indigenous groups in other nations who are at more developmental stages. We always make it clear to the people that we've worked with when we do the research, as well as at the reporting and dissemination phase, that we're available at all times to talk, to present, to distribute the research, all in the interest of servicing and building Indigenous media and through that Indigenous communities. This is a necessary part of the work that we do. And there's a great quote there: the people we are writing for are the people we are fighting for. And, you know, that's Deb's included that in this slide, which is a good reminder for us always. Next slide, Mon. That finishes our presentation. I'm sorry for the mix up with the slides there. But thank you all very much for listening. I hope you found it useful on behalf of Deb as well. And our whole team, but particularly us tonight, thank the fantastic stations and broadcasters that we visited and who hosted us to make this research possible. Thank you. Thanks for the claps. Over to you, Mon.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Thanks, Deb. That was terrific. My goodness. And yeah, it looks like you've created an exemplar that's going to influence international research in, you know, of Indigenous with working with Indigenous communities. So congratulations on that. And I'm sure there'll be lots more questions related to your study. We've got one more presentation, so I'll just try and find. I know it's you, Kelsey. I just want to get the title of your presentation right. So Dr. Kelsey Chapman, who is from Griffith University and also a member of the Inclusive Futures team at Griffith, who are a fabulous bunch of people. And Kelsey is going to be talking about the voice of Queenslanders with disability using citizen science and digital technology. Take it away, Chelsea.
Thanks, Monique. Can everybody see my screen okay? Awesome. Thank you. So I will start this evening / this morning by just giving a visual description of myself for people who can't see me. I'm a 35-year-old woman with long curly brown hair, green eyes, and fair skin. And I have a pair of what you might think look like telemarketer headphones on, but it's so that I can hear and speak to you clearly. I'm wearing a light blue shirt and my background's blurred. So I have the distinct pleasure of sharing with you all a project that we've been working on for the past 4 years, which is the Voice of Queenslanders with Disability, and how we're using citizen science with people with disability in a digital and in-person environment to collect data about what life is like to live with disability in Queensland, Australia. So before I begin, I too want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I work, which is the Kumbameri people, and the lands on which we're meeting today virtually. I know many of us are on unceded land, and I want to acknowledge that and the traditional owners and First Nations people who might be joining us today. I also want to acknowledge people with disability who have come before us and died in institutional settings or been silenced by institutional practices. I take on the role of speaking for people with disability when they cannot speak for themselves in an informed and considered manner, and do so with empathy and dignity. So just to give a little bit of framing, my slide on the screen now has a image of a young white man with short brown hair and a blue long sleeve shirt standing with one hand on his hip in front of a map. And my slide talks about language, which just says that we ascribe to the definition of disability in the United Nations Conventions on the Right of Persons with Disability, which says essentially that disability is an interaction or a mismatch really between people with impairments and the environments in which they live, work, play, and exist every day. So that's attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So that human rights framing of disability. So the Voice of Queenslanders with Disability survey / report / project, like I said, is a longitudinal project that brings together a couple of partners, the Queensland Government, Queenslanders with Disability Network, which is our state disability peak body representing diverse people with disability, and Griffith University. So our goal was to kind of do two things. The first was to run an annual survey, which is essentially a case study each year, but also has some longitudinal tracking across the 7 outcome areas of Queensland's disability plan. So that's pretty much every life domain that you could think of: employment, housing, health and well-being, community support and community inclusion, education and learning, safety, rights, and justice. So we've aligned with that strategy, and that's both a national strategy and a state strategy. And what we really wanted to do was that census-style data collection to see what life is like for people with disability and also their family and close significant others, to identify trends and shifts in what's happening on a ground level. We also wanted to do this trend tracking so that we can see we're in a big period of disability reform in Australia following a lengthy royal commission. And so we wanted to see how things that might be changing or might not be changing are affecting people on the ground level. And of course, in order to do this work, we wanted to do it in a really inclusive and accessible way. So first was trying to figure out what might that look like. And we wanted people with disability embedded and of course leading this work, and make sure that whatever we did was really grounded in lived experience. So I'm going to focus more on the process today. I'll share some of the outcomes of the process and some of the findings over the last 3 years. Excuse me if my voice is going out. So our method was to bring together 2 participatory methods: citizen science and co-design. And so in order to do this, we first brought together a governance group, which was people with disability from Queensland Government, from Queenslanders with Disability Network, and from Griffith University, to start to co-design what the survey questions might look like, what the survey experience might look and feel like, and user test that. So we settled on a combination of fixed and open responses. And then from there, we engaged with citizen scientists for the data collection and recruitment. So over the last 3 years, we've had 30 citizen scientists with disability from across the state. And in this instance, I guess what a citizen scientist means to us is this is a member of the community from which we're working to collect data, who comes on board with us in a paid capacity. They get some capacity building and training. We designed as part of this process a citizen science research 101 course to upskill people in ethics, governance, data collection, how to collect data really rigorous and robustly, and how to do so in a safe and ethical manner. And also what they should expect from us as their research partner. So things like asking to be remunerated and what that might look like. So in this project, we did that capacity building, and we do that every year. So there's some citizen scientists each year who have participated the year before, and they become leaders for the rest of the team. And we meet regularly. Once a week, we also do a little check-in and phone calls or Teams meetings with people who want to have a chat more about what they're doing. But it's a professional role for the 8 weeks that the survey is open, and then time before and time after as well. So we use the Dignity Project framework, which is like I say, something we prepared earlier from the oven, but we co-designed this in 2022, and this dignity framework is really about embedding dignity at the heart of the research perspective. So how we do the research, not just what we're doing. And so citizen science is our method of choice because it's an emancipatory method for people with disability when it's done with dignity and without tokenism. And so the kind of heart of this way of working is that people with disability are not participants and they're not amateurs. Rather, they're people with a real breadth of expertise, both lived experience of disability, but also just the lived experience of their various roles in life. And they are leaders in this way of knowing and connecting with their community and sharing this knowledge. And so it is typically a 5-stage kind of iterative process where they, like I said, come in at the beginning and help design all the research, user test it, identify the networks we're going to reach out to. And then we say uncover because I like to say we're really not discovering anything new. We're just creating space to uncover what people with disability have known for a very long time and just haven't had the opportunity to share or haven't had someone to listen. So in this instance, academic researchers like myself, we play really a supportive role across the 5 phases, providing methods training and opportunities to kind of enable people to build their capacity. Of course, critical reflection is a critical part, both for the research team and also our funders and the citizen scientists themselves to reflect on our own positionality within this work and how our biases might be influencing. And of course, with most participatory strategies, we're really advocating and agitating for that change. So we don't want to do all of this work and connect with all of these people and their networks and then have nothing to show for it. So that's kind of our overarching approach. Now, how we do this in practice, because I think that's one of the challenges. I'm an early career researcher myself, but I work with a lot of early career researchers as well. And one of the hardest things is how do we practically translate these participatory methods into the work that we do? So like I mentioned, we do that capacity building and support through our course and also through access to RED workshops. We're really lucky at our university. They offer a lot of professional development courses that are free, and they've given our citizen scientists access to those courses so they can be pursuing additional capacity building outside of what we can offer. We also have really flexible and diverse methods for engagement. So that looks like people engaging online from their home. We have citizen scientists who cannot leave their home or choose not to leave their home, so they can fully engage in an online flexible way. We have other people who are out on the street connecting with their local community because that's their preference for how they want to connect. So we're very flexible in how we can do that. Obviously, our ethics covers off on these diverse methods, and we worked quite hard with the ethics committee to try to get something that was really rigorous in place. We also try to reduce barriers to participation. So like I said, we pay our citizen scientists, but we also offer abridged versions of our surveys. So as people are completing them, if they decide that this is too long or it's not accessible for them, they can do a shortened version either on paper, they can download it onto their computer, print it off. Most of our citizen scientists have paper copies. We also have the survey obviously online. They can complete it via an interview with either our citizen scientists or with one of our research team. So they can also sign it in Australian Sign Language and submit that as well, audio record or video record. So there's a lot of options for how someone can participate to share their story. Probably one of the most important parts is working transparently. So like I mentioned, we have a big co-design governance group, mostly people with disability from the different funders and partners that we work with who meet together pretty much fortnightly to work through both the process and the findings. And then we translate and disseminate that in ways that are accessible. So we do have a big annual report that comes out, both a design version and an accessible version, but we really look for those opportunities like fact sheets and summaries and things that are in plain language and easy read so that the community can use this information that they've collected and become owners of it and use it for their own advocacy and their own work. So how we do this, I've touched on it really briefly, but we use the Dignity Hub, which is a research and engagement infrastructure online. So that online platform has over 700 citizen scientists with disability who come together, and they've collected data and shared their data over the past 3 years from over 1,700 participants. So this hub has a lot of functionality that enables us to do our work. It's compatible with screen reader. It's also user-friendly for people with intellectual and cognitive disability. And, we're constantly looking for ways to iterate and improve. And our community keeps us really honest about that. So this year, the big request was for a save button. So we're, constantly trying to do better and do more. So what this citizen science method has enabled us to do is to reach a really diverse group of participants that we're quite proud of. So over the 3 years, 30% of our participants are from outside urban areas, 5% are from First Nations background, 4% are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and 28% of our participants identify as LGBTQIA+. Years we made a really big effort to both recruit a citizen scientist from residential services, so that supported independent living in Australia, which essentially is kind of like a group home for people with disability, and it's quite a marginalized group of people. They don't often have access to research, and in fact, research is really hard to access for them. So we put a really committed effort in. We hired a citizen scientist from supported independent living, and then she helped us collect data from 130 people. So we were really proud of that this year. That includes people with what would be defined as severe and profound intellectual, cognitive, and psychosocial disability. So we are really excited. Those findings are going to be released in about 3 weeks' time publicly, and what that cohort has to share was really interesting. A lot of people in Australia, it's a big focus of reform that people living in supported accommodation have a really terrible life, and it's so awful, and their rights are being violated. And participants shared that there are a lot of challenges and a lot of violation of rights, but actually that some things quite unexpectedly are going really well, like they feel really healthy and that the home that they're living in meets their needs. So we're keen to kind of explore some of that data more, and it was really enabled by that citizen science approach. Some of our high-level results to date, obviously, it's quite obvious, but we have to constantly remind our government partners that there's no one single voice of people with disability. Everyone's experiences are diverse and often divergent. Even people with the same disability identity, there is no one size fits all. There was consensus around a couple of things: the ongoing cost of living crisis and how that was impacting people, their inability to be able to afford basic needs and having to make really challenging decisions between affording food and medicine, a general lack of government support. While we're really lucky in Australia to have the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is a federally funded disability support system, only 10% of people with disability have access to that. So there's a large part of the community that's under-supported and feel that and struggle with that every day. Other really important findings was the need to enhance dignity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in all areas, particularly in access to justice and increased advocacy and access to education and learning, and better access to health specialists. Participants told us, and our citizen scientists told us some of the following things: that they felt this method provided them a pathway to work to meet their needs. They thought it increased their knowledge of discrimination and how to counteract it better. They found that this was a place to solve accessibility issues through lived experience. I think this survey and project are a really good start and give me hope. Investing in understanding the communities you aim to serve is an important part of making inclusive and accessible outcomes. And this survey is giving us a voice, finally. It's not about governments saying what we need, it's about us telling them what we want. Finally, someone is listening. And lastly, I'll just end on some of our ongoing strengths and some of our strategies for moving forward. So we do have funding, very luckily, for another 3 years. We are one of the only research projects in Australia using extreme citizen science at this scale. And like I said, we have employed more than 30 people with disability, including 10 who are in more consistent professional roles. One of the best outcomes for me is that we employed someone with psychosocial disability last year and again this year, and she had been in institutional living for over 10 years, and this was her first ever job. And no one had ever given her a chance to work before. And she was honestly one of our best recruiters because she had such a broad, strong community network. And she shared stories from a community that's relatively under-researched. So it just really increased our capability and ability to hear more stories from harder to reach communities. And of course, really one of our strategies going forward is to continue to push on and into that, to try to make our research easier to access as opposed to saying that people are hard to reach, and to continue to really push and grow our intersectional community. And so that's it for me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you all about the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Kelsey. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Terrific insights into your research. That was such a huge project, and I'd also like to sort of note that you've co-authored, you co-published with your with the people you collaborate with too. So from that diverse community that you're working with. So just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thanks, Monique. Yeah, one of the things I forgot as well is that our graphic designer, our graphic designer, our research assistants, and our research team are all people with disability as well. So it's really about creating that employment and leadership capability too.
Yeah, it's so critical. Thanks, Kelsey. Now I'd love to open up the floor for questions for our amazing panelists tonight, or this morning, if we're in South Africa. We haven't got a lot of time. We've got about 10 minutes. Any questions? I'll throw in a question if someone doesn't put one forward. I have no questions, but it was amazing. Thank you for sharing. It's so inspiring. That's a really, really special comment. Thanks. Thank you, Laura. Oh, yes. Is that Zainab? Do you have a question? Yes.
Oh, yes. Hi, Monique. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Great to see you.
Yeah, it was a very interesting session from all our presenters today. And we're here in the CCMS office with quite a few of us. Thank you to everybody. I just have a question. In the interest of time, I'll keep it short. A question for Prof. Govender and Dr. Gumede. With regards to art-based methodologies, what is your, if you could just briefly, because I know we are rushing for time, what's your approach for analyzing or data analysis around such data collection methods? And do you also use interviews or some kind of discussion focus group to supplement analysis around art-based methodologies, or do you just work with the art pieces that are produced in these sessions? Thank you.
All right. Shall I start, Prof?
Yeah, you can go
Eliza?
for it and I can add. Yeah.
Yeah. So I very much lean towards thematic analysis, and more particularly Brown and Clark's reflexive thematic analysis for analyzing art-based or data emanating from art-based methods research. So we've worked in different ways for different projects. So for example, with the project on vaginal product use, we've used a combination of the art-based methods with focus group discussions after going through. So it's like a 3.5-hour process that starts with art-based research methods, and then we conclude with a focus group discussion. So in terms of the data that would be sitting in those art products, we take that and put it either on an Excel spreadsheet in Word form, because it's usually supplemented with expressions and words that people will have used in drawing up whatever they're drawing up. So we extrapolate all of that and put it on an Excel spreadsheet, especially for manual coding, and we code using that, your usual process that you would use with verbal data that you would have collected. But we also, because usually we follow up the art-based methods with discussion where participants reflect on what they've drawn, and they tell us more about what they've drawn and why they've drawn it, right? So we have an opportunity to ask about colors, that they've used, choice of colors. Does it mean anything? Is there anything particularly or that influences their choice of colors? Why did they draw something in the way in which they drew it? So that we get even more depth out of that. And so all of that obviously is even richer data that enables us to really get much deeper insights in to what participants would have drawn. Even with photo voice, right? So participants will take those photographs, but we will have a session where they will talk more about those photographs and their choice of why they took those photographs, what those photographs mean to them. So the data gets analyzed using the thematic analysis process. I don't know if it's well, maybe let me just say it can be challenging, because art-based research methods generate quite a significant amount of data, and you can really get lost in the richness and depth of the data that you've got. It can be a challenge, but it's something that's doable. Over to you, Prof. Eliza.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Phumi. I also see there's another hand raised. I don't want to take up any more time. But just to say, Zainab, I think it's a process of triangulation where we code the text on the body maps or the journey maps. We then look at what's in the foreground, what's in the background, why people may have strategically positioned their data on different spaces on a body map or a journey map. That's followed up by interviews or focus group discussions. And there's also, very importantly, the researcher journal. I think the researcher positionality and how we engage with that data, the pretext, the context, our own biasness and subjectivities often has to come into play there. So there's actually quite a few data sets coming in together, but just very importantly to say there's a textual analysis level. It's thematicized using reflexive thematic analysis, very importantly understanding the researcher's position in how we're coding that data, but it's always followed up with interviews and focus groups. So there's a bit of encoding and decoding there where we understand how participants may have encoded certain images, and we go through a conversation to decode those images as well. Okay, over to you, Chair.
Thanks, Eliza and Pume. And I can see the fabulous Ngobile has her hand up. So over to you, Ngobile. Yeah, your microphones are off.
Mute.
Sorry. Hello. I just wanted to say that I'm happy to participate. This has been very, very insightful. It's so amazing to hear some of the work that is going on also in Australia, as well as our CCMS. My question has to do with, I think it cuts across ethical considerations. So art-based methods are they're not the norm, as Prof and Dr. Kumete was saying. And I'm assuming that even research with Indigenous communities is not really what ethical committees expect. So I just like presenters to talk us briefly through some of the ethical considerations that you might make to navigate some of the ethical problems that might arise or challenges that might arise when you're doing empirical research and for projects. Thank you.
Deb, do you want to talk about the ethics that we adhere to, both the formal ethics and as well as other things, or do you want me to address that?
Oh, up to you. It just depends on how much detail you want to go into. I mean, in terms of ethics that we do in terms of Indigenous research, is we have really rigorous process and ethical standards to adhere to. There are specific requirements that we have to go through in terms of process. I mean, are we talking about process, or are we talking about, ethics per se? Susan, what do you want me to cover?
Yeah, well, I think it's both. I mean, I would just make the comment that, we all have a human research ethics process at all of our universities, but when we're doing research with Indigenous peoples, there's another process that we need to go through as well in making sure that our research involves, for example, consultation with Indigenous people and that kind of thing.
And particularly informed consent. Informed consent, making sure that people are well aware of exactly what we're doing in the research project, that people are fully briefed and that they consent to the data that we're actually using. So we've got a whole variety. We have actual guidelines by what we call an institute here called IATSIS, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies Association, and they've got this whole gamut about the ways that people should conduct research, and our ethics committees make sure that we respond to each of those ethic priorities and address those before we can even begin to undertake research. But it's about reciprocity, it's about informed consent, and all sorts of ethical requirements like that. The core principle in doing no harm. Yeah. But before I move on, I just want to address one of the questions Zanab asked Eliza and colleague about arts-based methods. And we talked about the Aboriginal method of yarning here, but yarning has also been further developed into what they call photo yarn by an Aboriginal researcher here called Jessa Rogers. And she has a paper out. I was going to just stick a link to it briefly in the chat, called Photo Yarn, Developing a New Arts-Based Method, which is about how she did interviews and collected research with Maori girls in boarding schools in New Zealand through an arts-based approach, and got them to take photos and spoke back to that. But I don't know if I can just put it in the chat here, if it maybe people can look at it themselves. Yeah.
Thanks, Deb. Now I can see Zainab's group's hand up again, but I've also got a couple of questions, or a question from Catalina, which I might go there first. But how can research, and I'm mindful we're a minute over, and I'm hoping we can go over a little bit by some minutes, Eliza. I'm just checking with Eliza if that's okay. I'm just mindful you guys are starting your day. But how can researchers ensure that different communities feel genuinely involved in the various stages of the research process, even in delivering results? In other words, how can the research cycle be fully closed?
I'll just offer one very brief comment. Lauren.
Oh no, it's fine. Go, Susan.
I'll say a sentence which is, Deb and I sort of talked about the methodology and the approach, which is really quite, multi-layered and complex, both in the way the research starts, the way the research is carried out, but then the way the research is also disseminated and closed in terms of this question here. So when I talked at the end about, the way that it's written up and disseminated, hopefully that brings a close to the research cycle in that it's brought back to the people who contributed to the research in terms of the communities, that the benefit to the community is clear, and if it's not clear, then we find out how the communities can receive benefit from the research that has been brought forward and the evidence that we have. But to some extent, the research cycle for us stays open as well. And, we made that comment at the end about making ourselves available to these people and these communities that helped us with our research, and to First Nations Media Australia, who are currently in the process of, trying to enact their 9 calls to action from the federal government. And so we've left that open to them to say, if you need anything from any of the work that we've done, let us know. If you need us to turn up to a meeting, we will be there. If you need us to do another presentation to policymakers, we can. So in some ways, I would say that research process and that importance of providing back and giving back to the communities involved remains open as well.
I'll just quickly come in if that's okay. I just want to reiterate what Susan said, and I even wrote it down so you can say I'm not copying you, Susan. But really, so it's very important that obviously communities feel involved in every stage, kind of deliberating on who's going to be involved, and we know that. But I think as important as feeling part of the closed project, more importantly is that value of continual improvement. So the question that we should come together as a group of researchers, as a team, and say, how can we do things differently? What worked and what didn't work? And we did that a lot with Bishiput, the first project that we did. And that's when Isak Krape had said, let it grow. And I think that the fact that we can carry on growing things into not necessarily the same type of project, but little spider projects on the side, that's where the real value comes in. And to take the initiative from people who are not necessarily sitting in an institution and say, okay, you want to do some cultural landscaping of your area? Great, we'll go and do that. It's just those moments that I think people in the Indigenous communities and local communities really do feel the value of our kind of work that we're doing.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. I know Zainab's group, so Gilbert from Zainab's group in the collective there has a question. And then I'm also mindful that there's a question from Pume for Kelsey in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I have a question to Dr. Essel. My apologies, I came in through the middle of his presentation and I don't know whether you touched on it. What is the visibility of syndication in light of the dwindling sponsorship, more so through the NGOs, in light of what President Trump did? Thank you.
Okay, so Monique, I don't know whether it's okay for me to just respond to it. Monica,
what was
can
that?
Can I go ahead and respond to him?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, so the basis of community media, whether it's community radio or CATs, it's supposed to be self-sustaining. Really, it's supposed to be participatory across the entire range, from program production to broadcast to management and stuff like that. So usually, community radio stations, though they may have different origins, have really involve community participation in terms of sustainability. So with the CATs, for instance, they are not donor funded. I've not seen a single CAT that's donor funded. They are usually individuals who started, sometimes communities or local associations who start those things. The bigger issue is with community radio, because that requires a bit of modern technology. So it's sustainability is a real issue, and we've had discussions back and forth about these things. So I think for me, it is about community realizing that you can't work in silos, that you can't operate in different ways, and that building synergies, building collaboration, building partnership is really the way to achieve sustainable social change. So I think it's more about engaging and trying to change the way we do things so that we will not see that this is us against them. Because ultimately, with community radio, it's supposed to be broadcasting by, for, and about the community. And I think from that perspective, it helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. There's a question, some comments, and I think, Pume, you've got your answer from Kelsey about the repository.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And there's a question from Elva about the way research findings can be disseminated to be beneficial. So Elva,
Monique,
did you want to put, oh, yep, Kelsey, sure.
I just was going to jump in. That's something that we've actually had a really hard time with. So one of our early things that we identified with our citizen scientists was to publish in The Conversation, because that's a free media outlet that's publicly available to most people, and it's in very plain language, unpacking research. But people without an academic email cannot be co-authors. And so we were previously taking our citizen researchers and making them adjuncts at the university just so they had an academic email. And recently, within the past couple of months, they brought in a new policy that says consumers can be co-authors and don't have to have an academic email. So I think part of the work that we do is like one part agitating against all the barriers that inhibit the type of dissemination that we want to do, and two parts actually disseminating. So we try to do as many free events as possible so that there's no barrier to entry for people with disabilities. So we do a lot of community forums and Teams meetings and workshops and things like that. And like I said, one of the big things that we're trying to do is balance the kind of academic publish and perish metrics. Like we have to publish, so we're trying to publish with our citizen researchers every time, and then also trying to look for opportunities for them to present. So for our community to present to their community, we don't even have to be there. So that's part of something we are writing into grant applications, funding for our consumers to present and funding for them to travel, so that we're getting the information out into the community in ways that are beneficial to them. I don't know if that answers your question there, Elva.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great. I'm just looking at the time. We are 8:10 in the evening, which is 11 for you in South Africa. Is that correct?
12. 10
12.
past 12.
Oh gosh, your stomachs will be grumbling.
Yeah, it is.
Grumbling and rumbling. So we will let you go. Now, also, you can all access this Teams chat. Debbie's putting some great links here, which just has just shared another link. So thanks so much, Debbie, for that. Yeah, and look, I would just like to say a huge thank you. I feel like I've been on an amazing journey through different fields and different field work this evening, very different and distinct cultural contexts as well. You're all doing such important research. You can see from the comments on how rich this discussion has been and how inspired people are by all of these presentations. So thank you so much to all the presenters, and thank you so much also to the fabulous audience who have been here, especially those who are coming in. I appreciate it's quite late for some of you in the day. So yeah, really just a big thank you. Eliza, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Just to thank you, Monique, as the chair, for reaching out to UKZN. Monique is an honorary as well with CCMS at UKZN, so she's actually holding dual hats at the moment as a honorary at UKZN as well as at Griffith. But thank you for reaching out and setting up this very engaging seminar. And I think following through on a lot of the comments from the chat, it is a very topical area of research, bringing in very different nuances and perspectives from the different presenters. So thank you for bringing it together, and to our presenters for making the time to share your very exciting research on co-creating change. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Eliza. It's such an honour to be able to be part of this and host this. And yeah, I think there'll be, hopefully we can continue these discussions. I know I'm mindful a number of you are at IAMCR members, and we'll have panels, in the future to discuss all this. I was really keen, and Eliza and I were really keen to bring together the KwaZulu and Griffith teams, given as you can see, the really strong synergies and similarities in the research approaches that you're doing in terms of co-design, community engagement and participatory action research. So thanks everybody, and I guess that's it from me.
Thank you.
What a great evening.
Everyone. Yeah. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.